Hello and welcome to the Ludic Insights podcast. This series explores themes and topics relating to all things digital and digital's impact on our societies, leadership and ways of getting things done. My name is Garrick Jones, I'm from the Ludic Group and I'm a co-author of the book Alive, Digital Humans and Their Organizations, available on Amazon Kindle and in bookstores near you. This edition is about multimedia engagement, and we're joined by Alex Matthews, who's the head of Ludic's digital design studio.
Hello.
And John McGinty, who's the head of Ludic's film and animation studio.
Hello.
I am, of course, here with my co-author and co-partner in Ludic, Paul Ashcroft.
Hello.
Thank you for listening. We're going to understand what world-class, digitally, globally engaged agency is all about. We're talking today about some of the most powerful and impactful and memorable engagement experiences we know.
People will engage in things in their busy time if it's something that they can actually do and use.
They have to very clearly see the objective of it and have to see how it matters to them.
The focus should be on showing and inspiring them through action.
Engagement is huge today, especially when working digitally. Things have changed dramatically. Top-down communication broadcasting is old school and is no longer as effective. And my question is why? Because these days digital enables everyone to be involved. Our premise is that people these days want to be part of authoring the stories. What do you think, Alex?
Well, I think that it's that personalised aspect that is really important with engagement. It's kind of giving people an agency. So if it's an infographic, say, rather than just feeding people information, if you can get them to input something so that the infographic becomes more tailored towards them, you're going to get more. You're going to get more enthusiasm.
And Alex, you're head of the Ludic Digital Studio. What kind of things are you making for engagement, for example?
God, we're making so many things at the moment. We're doing interactive graphics, interactive infographics, apps. But the thing I'm most excited about at the moment is games. So that is becoming a huge thing. Companies are really looking to use games to create ideas, to innovate, and to disseminate information.
John, you're head of the animation and film studio. What has that got to do with engagement?
So I suppose there's two prongs to what we do within film animation at Ludic. The first is using film and animation as it's intended, is as a standalone engagement tool. So people watch something, they do something, they buy something, they learn something, that kind of thing. And the second is, I suppose, using film and animation as much more of a support for larger scale engagement programs. So that may be actually some of the stuff that Alex was speaking about, like with a game, for example. If you're releasing a game company-wide for X thousand of associates or employees, a video or an animation could be a tutorial for how they play that game. It could tell them where to go to play that game. It could show them what to expect, all that kind of stuff. So there's kind of two elements, I suppose, to what we do.
Well, I know you've also been involved in something called interactive films, which was new to me. What is an interactive film and how does that work with engagement?
To try and define it in its simplest terms, an interactive video is one that requires some form of input from a viewer or user, rather. That could be as simple as pressing or clicking a button, answering a question, making a selection, anything that requires some form of input. So the key difference between interactive film and, say, traditional video is one of this kind of active-passive dichotomy, in that a traditional video could pass the user by without doing anything. You know, you're never quite sure if they're actually watching. They could just be falling asleep. Yeah. Whereas an interactive video, if you're asking them to press a button, you at least know they're awake and paying attention.
Is that a lot? Is it like that Netflix thing that series that was on recently?
Well, funny you should say, yeah. So in, I think, December of 2018, Netflix released I don't think it was their first interactive video. They did some other ones, but it's certainly the biggest. It was called Bandersnatch, part of the Black Mirror series, and it had huge popularity. So I think there were multiple endings, multiple choices you could make throughout the episode, all having an impact on kind of what the character did or what happened in the story. So it was very much like those kind of old school choose your adventure type books that I used to read as a kid.
And you guys are doing that in the kind of corporate engagement or large scale digital networked engagement stuff.
Yep, exactly. And it has the same benefits. Like much in the same way as you watch this Black Mirror episode and you choose how the story plays out, in an interactive video using around, strategy or whatever it might be, you can choose how that story plays out for yourself. So a good example actually we've done in the past is around kind of decision making and around kind of moral dilemmas, if you like. So what happens when you find a person on the street? Do you A, take it and don't tell anyone, or B, hand it into the local police station? And when you make that option, you get to see that decision play out, and it tells you a lot about yourself, hopefully.
And how does this link to engagement?
Well, people are engaged when they are, I think, actively involved in what they're viewing or what they're doing. So by having them have to make people make a decision, they get to make the choices and are actively involved in choosing that direction they want to take.
It's like building a narrative, isn't it, really? I mean, it's essentially a story that you're kind of involved in writing.
I imagine that the nature of interactive film also gets over one of the problems of making films, which is that they quickly have a shelf life. You make a film, maybe it's timely and costly to make, but then it may only last, 3 months, 6 months, and it's done. With interactive film, I guess you can swap in and out different elements and keep it fresh.
Yep, and depends on how you build it. Without getting too technical, there's no reason why you can't expand upon a story at a later date. So you build a 5-minute interactive film, for example, that has a finite number of endings, let's say 3, but later on down the line, you want to build more out. There's no reason why you can't inject other points into that story or even add extra elements on top.
What's your guys' experience about working with global teams? Because the thing about digital is we're now definitely working with projects and teams who are distributed all over the world, not necessarily in the same time zones, all trying to get things done. What have you done that enables those teams to kind of be engaged and have an identity and achieve their results or outcomes?
I suppose one of the things of the interactive films that John was just talking about is that after someone has gone through the process, they then will share it with their colleagues. But the question is, how do you get people who don't know each other, they've never met because they work in the office in China, and they want to you want them to work with somebody who works in the US. So one of the things that we've done also is to create a game where you're encouraged to invite people from different functions and from different global locations to form a team, and then that team would then play a game. They might be answering sort of multiple choice questions, doing a bit of learning, and then getting involved in a scenario where they're all using their own sort of skills and understanding.
What kind of a game is it online?
People don't have that much time, and you work with the familiar. It's always very good to work with the familiar and also the universal. So people are familiar with Ludo or Snakes and Ladders or Monopoly. So the idea of a track and so on, or drawing cards and answering questions, Trivial Pursuit kind of a thing, that will engage the majority of people because they've all had good experiences of sharing that kind of.
And they're getting these games on their app, on their mobile phones?
And yeah, it could be on their app, and it could just be on their desktop computer while they're at work. Essentially, the point is that you're getting people situated globally together, forming a team, using a chat function. By using the game, you're turning that sort of talking to people, sharing your knowledge into a social experience. You're bringing people in an organisation closer together. And that's the ultimate goal, I think, of engagement. It's to help large companies, often siloed, to bring people together so they can work together better.
What about you, John? What do you think? What do people pay attention to?
So much of the video work we do now is kind of focused on the user-generated content. So often a lot of iPhone footage that people have recorded themselves, often of variable quality, but there's editing tools you can use to make it look better. But yeah, but that point that people are filming themselves on the ground and it's their experiences, it's kind of this kind of like raw footage in a way where it feels very natural, very honest. I've seen a couple of kind of uncut series in organizations where they don't use editing at all. So really breaking down that kind of barrier between people. And I suppose it's a reflection of wider society now, like with YouTube and how many sort of vlogging channels there are. It's just someone talking at a camera for 20 minutes, but people are really engaged because it's that natural experience.
I've got a controversial question then. Do you think professionals will still be needed to kind of make this material, or are we heading to a world where everybody is an amateur, everybody's creating media in some way, it's all going online, and any of this mediated media is not required? Is that what do you think?
I think our jobs aren't quite in danger yet, but there's a potential to. I always say, I think everyone has the potential to be a filmmaker. Not everyone necessarily is right now.
Yeah.
But that kind of potential is what's interesting. And I think there'll always be a need to shape that story. I suppose veer into storytelling is a little bit. But, I mean, anyone can make a film. Anyone can make a video. Is it engaging? That's the question.
Not everybody can tell a story.
Precisely. But everyone has the ability to. Is just translating that into a video that works and into the format it works, actually, because we're talking about games, we're talking about videos, we're talking about infographics. All of them have their own kind of pros and cons. All of them have, the best practices and worst practices, and often it's knowing which medium to use for the right reasons and what messages to include in that.
I think it's important that you democratise these things as well, get people who are professional filmmakers to make films, because they'll get more interested in the subject. They'll watch more films, they'll learn more, and then by making their own, and they're contributing to the conversation.
And so engagement is really, from my perspective, about everybody co-authoring, everybody being part of the story and understanding their place in the story and what they're telling about the story, and how that collaborative authoring enables outcomes, enables things to be achieved because everybody is engaged.
I like what you're saying, Alex, there about putting tools in people's hands. So a lot of the work that people do these days is very digital, but we live in a physical world, and bringing together and joining together that physical and digital in a way that people, I guess, understand how what they are learning about is relevant to what they are doing. Lots of different ways of doing this, but how does film, game, design, augmented reality, virtual reality, how do these things help, do you think? What have you seen that works?
What I'm really interested in is the way these different technologies can dovetail, and you can use them in hybrid ways. So, for example, I think of learning styles. So where some people learn in a kinetic way, or some people like to learn by reading, listening, and so on. So you can provide them multiple options. So there's no reason why you can't have a VR experience that's also just a regular on-a-screen film experience. At the moment, there's a real trend designing analog games, cardboard games with cards and so on. But there's games now which are partly tabletop and partly app, getting people in companies sitting around a table. So you're creating this sort of team, but it's both analog and digital, and you could play it remotely as well, with not even sitting in the same room.
Again, it's personalisation of the information and something that's modular that can be updated, right? So why, again, you might make an investment in a physical game or a physical tool, you can keep it up to date with new digital media, right?
Lots of people's fear, I think, certainly in corporates, is that this kind of stuff is expensive and it's difficult to do. What's your response to that, John?
It's interesting. Like I always say, when people say, how much does a 3-minute film cost? I said, well, very much depends on your content. Like 3 minutes of Michael Bay's Transformers is very different to 3 minutes of EastEnders, right? They both come at very different price points, but it's so flexible. And this is the best thing about film, and maybe interactive film. So I can reflect on a story here where we worked with a client who were in a decent position in they had loads of pre-existing videos from years gone by. The problem was, with all this content, is that everyone had seen it multiple times and were bored by it. So what we suggested was to kind of use that material in a different way. So we put it together in an interactive video package where there was different ways of exploring it. So it was all around values and behaviours. And so what we did, we created this interactive, similar to a game actually, interactive kind of graphic that people could select, but each one was sort of a card, and behind that card you'd be presented with one of the behaviours, and in those behaviours were all the video materials, all the kind of Q&As, top tips that they had already existed, but it was presented in a different way. By kind of gamifying it and having that kind of multiple choice, it made it really interesting for the viewer. And of course this is stuff that was already made, no extra cost other than to build the actual interactive video itself, so it was done very cheaply and easily.
Top tips for engagement from the film and animation studio.
Yes, there's one thing I'll come back to, which is which is always interesting, is to always think about the audience. I touched upon it earlier where I said, each medium has its own benefits and disadvantages. And I think really you've almost got to put yourself into the shoe of your end user or the person you're trying to engage. What interests them? What are maybe the 3 to 5 key things you want them to do? And then tailor the product to that, whether it's the messages within or even the actual thing, whether it's an infographic, a game, a video, whatever it may be. Make sure it's useful to them. Think about, for example, as simple as physically, where are they consuming it? Is it something they're going to be doing at the desk, in a group with other teammates, on a train home? Each one will have its own different kind of best use for media. So a video, an interactive video, for example, might not work best in a group, whereas it will if it's someone at the desk learning. So that's what I'd say, probably, to summarise, put yourself into your user's shoes and what would work best for them. Alex,
top tips from the design studio?
We have 4 principles, I think, to help engage people with visual thinking. Visual thinking particularly, but this can apply across the board. So simplicity, keep it simple. If you're inundating people with information, they're not going to be engaged. They're going to switch off. So make it bite-sized, make it modular, make it so that people can dive into it for a few minutes at a time. Familiarity, use the familiar. I touched on this before. Use experiences that they will understand. Use some visual wit if you can. People love wit. I don't mean necessarily making it funny. I'm talking about hiding an Easter egg. So, for example, the logo for FedEx has the hidden arrow. And lastly, metaphor and analogy work very, very well. It creates a story around something. So if you've got a complex thing to visualize it as a ship sailing through choppy waters.
So I'm fascinated by the nature of our conversation where we started talking about multimedia and we've really focused in on interactive media, and actually that all decent engagement tools are now actually interactive media, whether that's a game that you're playing with somebody so they can contribute, a film where they can choose their own adventure. Seems to me this is about making engagement more personalised, varied, light touch. People are busy, so how do you keep it light touch, fun? And how do you keep it relevant in the moment? People will engage in things in their busy time if it's something that they can actually do and use and it's meaningful for them now. So I think the focus on that is also important.
Yeah, it's making it meaningful for them, I think, as well. They have to very clearly see the objective of it and have to see how it matters to them. And if that isn't laid out or it's confused in some way, it's not going to land. So for me, definitely. And making it personalised will often do that.
I suppose we've been talking about all different kinds of multimedia, and there's an old cliche in film and probably other mediums as well, and that's show, don't tell. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of telling the user what you want them to do or what you want them to learn. Whereas with film, or indeed any visual medium, the focus should be on showing and inspiring them through action, through, as Alex said, visuals, metaphors, themes, and other ideas.
Thank you, guys. It was great to see what's inside your heads. And now I realise why you're both the heads of what you are the heads of. Ludic. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Today, you've been listening to the Ludic's Insight podcast. We've been focusing on multimedia engagement. And thank you for listening.